This 21st century loser was cooking instant noodles. Suddenly, he time traveled to a world where men love each other. He became the maid of a queen in name only. The first scene he encountered was a brutal childbirth, as a seasoned spectator and avid reader of time travel novels. No wonder his hands and feet felt so real, just like his own body. But before she could ponder the meaning of these words, the childcare battle began. The female lead became a mother without pain. She experienced that raising a child is torture and raising someone else's child is even more of a hellish punishment. Luckily, during the day, Ailey, who was skilled in childcare, helped out. He was emotionally agitated. If you're not in a relationship, why are you sleeping together? The two carefree individuals thought it was perfectly normal for the sake of close protection and childcare efficiency. Aster was even quite proud. This is Aster's method of maximizing efficiency with minimal people. Mio, taking the little prince, also fully agreed with this statement. This was completely beyond Hill's imagination. He blurted out, "Sir Mio, I thought at least you were normal." Clearly, he thought Aster's thought process was extraordinarily peculiar. Aster didn't want to continue discussing this issue. He illogically but boldly extended his hand, "Lend me money." The female lead showed you what it means to be rich and foolish. The two arrived at the previous restaurant for their date. Teacher Saya thoughtfully asked, "Are your shoes comfortable for walking today?" It turned out he had noticed Astor's discomfort last time. Astor's heart raced, his face flushing. A man as attentive as the teacher must be very popular, right? Teacher Saya arrested his face on his hand, smiling, and said honestly, "It seems you haven't met any good men." After the meal, the two were walking hand in hand along the summer streets. They came to a fountain. It was very lively here. There was even a legend that if you throw a copper coin into its mouth, your wish will come true. Aster excitedly rummaged through his small purse. But at night, it was like going through hells. This was snatched from Hill. He quickly took out a coin, swiftly threw it towards the fountain. However, it fell into the water with a splash. He happily scratched his head. This is indeed hard to aim. Then he handed his purse over. "Teacher, you throw one too." Saya's face had turned pale. He was sweating profusely. "You just threw a gold coin." "You do know that, right?" Aster was stunned. "This black thing is actually a gold coin. It looks exactly like a 10 yuan coin from the previous world." Saya looked at the bag full of gold coins. Amazed, "How much salary did you take out?" This is what Astra snatched. "I don't usually need much money." So he wasn't clear about the currency value in this country. He didn't even know where to collect his salary. Astra looked at the lovely atmosphere around him. He realized that in others' eyes, he and Saya might look like that couple. Suddenly, Saya nodded at Ashizgazi. He smiled and leaned closer, causing Astor's heart to race and his face to flush. The two held hands as they headed the teacher, Saya's paradise. After many days of non-stop work, Astra fell asleep during a dictation test. Teacher Zha asked Astor if she had received any education before. Passing through a large forest, they arrived at an uninhabited ruin. Whenever he needed to rest, he would come here. Astor was amazed by the magnificent architecture. Something like a UFO was embedded in the tree trunk. It created a magical scene, half withered and half lush, just like the giant mountain rats of this world. Saya invited Aster to sit under the tree. The air here was fresh. However, Aster looked at the big flying saucer above his head, very afraid it might collapse. Saya had already lain down, looking enchanted. The scent of grass and this tranquility were refreshing. Aster lay down and closed his eyes. He also felt the rare beauty. Aster and teacher Saya arrived at the secret base. They lay on the grass, chatting about everything. They talked about unrealized dreams. Surprisingly, Saya had always fantasized about becoming a magician. But because magicians are born, not made, he had to give up. Astor's dream was to go home, but no one in this world could understand him. He could only smile and say his dream was to build the family he wanted, a family like others have. In the relaxed atmosphere, he fell asleep after a while. Astor thought to herself that she was actually a top student but could only deny it out loud. Looking at Astor's test paper, she felt that she seemed to have learned some basics from a non-professional, as if she knew how to write words and pronounce various letters. He only woke up when night fell. Aster woke up. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Astor's beautiful smiling face. Against the backdrop of the night sky, it looked especially enchanting. He smiled and said, "Aster, there are stars in your eyes too." After ending the day's date, Aster returned to the Queen's palace. "He'll said on the side I saw you get today." Hearing this, Aster was shocked and dropped the water glass he was holding. It shattered on the ground. He made a tisk-tisk sound, very disapproving of his clumsiness but concerned if he was hurt. Then he told him not to move. He raised his hand, used magic to restore the glass. He also cast a purification spell to make the water drinkable. Astor was very confused about why the two of them were in the kitchen. It turned out that Yuga had given Hill a packet of tea today, said to be very effective for treating insomnia, so he wanted to try it. Mio's intention was obvious, but he couldn't say it directly, so he just said he was thirsty and followed. Astor asked Hill about his impression of Yuga. Hill just said, "We've only met once at a banquet, but he recognized me at first sight. He's quite attentive, a beautiful person emitting golden light. Other than that, no other feelings." Astor was a bit surprised. In the escape plot, it was written that Yuga helped Hill improve his insomnia. Hearing this, Astor thought she might be a genius. Could it be that she got a perfect score when she happily received a graded test paper? Because of this, Hill fell in love with Yuga and became his follower. But it should be impossible to win over a follower with just this small packet of tea. However, his looks were like an absolute rule in this world. They were magical. All the fish in his Playboy pond fell in love at first sight the moment they saw him. Previously, he was worried that the powerful magician would also become his follower, so he had been anxious about their meeting. But he only commented that he was beautiful. Could it be that something in the original story had changed? While making tea and chatting with Hill, the two were so familiar that they spoke in their own language, leaving Astor out. It was said that Klein was about to return because the royal prisoners of war from Rohai had arrived. The three of them tasted the tea. Hill expressed that he was touched that Yuga could give him such a gift, showing he was a thoughtful and kind person. Unlike the fairy or such names he was called in the queen's palace, if the tea tastes good, you might even like her. Astor felt a bit of panic in his heart. How could he say such ominous words? Surprisingly, all three of them unanimously praised the taste of the tea. The next day, Astor made tea to share with Saya, but it tasted terribly bad. Astor was embarrassed. Wasn't it just throwing the tea leaves in after the water boiled? Saya took a sip and asked directly if he could make the tea again. She found that there were very few correct answers and the number of wrong answers was like rainfall. But on second thought, given the limited study time, this score was acceptable. Thus, team-making skills were added to Astor's curriculum. Suddenly, Anna rushed over anxiously, shouting that something terrible had happened. Her face was very pale and her whole body was trembling. The prince has disappeared. Anna and Ellie were supposed to take turns watching him, but during the shift change, he vanished in the blink of an eye. If discovered, everyone would be executed. Astor comforted her, saying they must stay calm now. The two stayed to check the room. Saya and Astor went to quietly search the corridor. The worst part was that the queen had visitors today. According to royal etiquette, even guards outside the door would leave the door slightly open to prevent incidents inside. Astor feared the prince might have sneaked in unnoticed, so he decided to crouch down to avoid other sight and quietly peek inside. But his target was too big and Sir Alex spotted him. Astor made a shushing gesture indicating not to make a sound. Fortunately, he was a good person and cooperated, though he looked extremely stiff. Astor tugged at his trouser leg, asking if he had seen the little prince. However, the answer was negative. The queen's sister's voice came from inside. "I want a child now, no matter what. Whatever the cost, it doesn't matter." Astor peeked inside secretly, trying hard to find any sign of the little prince. Suddenly, he was hit hard on the head from behind. Just as she finished that thought, she blacked out again. It's said that many new mothers suffer from depression and cry all the time. Astor collapsed instantly, blood kept flowing from his head. His ears were ringing with a loud wind chime sound when he saw those snake-like eyes. Astor understood. He was the queen's sister's husband, Klein's beloved Eddie's brother, Seller Kargi. Astra, who was searching for the little prince, was suddenly hit on the head with a stick from behind. Blood flowed immediately. Alex quickly stood in front of Astor. "Count Kargi, he's not someone you can dispose of at will. He's a prince's wet nurse. He must have his reasons for doing this." Seller's face was contorted with disgust. "A servant is just a servant. How dare a wet nurse eavesdrop on the queen's conversation?" Alex still protected him from the front. "Even if his status is low, it's not for you to punish. Don't make this a big issue." Seller frowned, very angry inside but unable to vent. After having someone announce him, he entered the queen's room. Soon the door was thrown open with a loud bang. Astor wasn't a new mother, so why did she feel like crying too? Ailey, concerned, told Astor to rest against the wall for a while. Seller dragged his wife out, striding towards the exit. The countess still wanted to explain, but Seller told her to shut up and that they'd talk at home. Finally, peace returned to the queen's chambers. The little prince was also found behind the screen in the room, stroking the little prince's smiling face. Wiping the blood from his forehead, Aster thought, "You must repay me when you grow up." He felt very sad inside. Whenever he started to feel a connection with this world, it seemed to push him away, saying, "You don't belong to this world." Was he becoming reluctant to leave? No, now he was more certain, "I can't survive in this world." The prince's doctor bandaged Astor's wound. The maids around were at a loss. They can certainly told him to rest well. Even though Aster said he was fine, he was still pushed into the room. Since that was the case, he flopped onto the bed. After calming down, he remembered Sellers' cold eyes full of evil, revealing contempt that didn't see him as human. Under his gaze, even breathing was difficult. Although very displeased, his appearance seemed to connect those messy, unconnected pieces of information. She immediately saw Sir Mio, looking equally exhausted from lack of sleep. He had a psychological shadow about his birth that tormented him his whole life. The novel wrote that Yuga resolved his inner conflict with just a few words. Afterwards, Seller began to obsessively adore Yuga, who had saved him. He even destroyed the queen's maiden family for him. There seemed to be parts unknown to those outside the novel. The moment Aster saw him, his appearance similar to Klein's and those identical eyes, he was almost certain they shared the same blood. The day after Aster was injured, Yuga and the king suddenly visited without notice. Yuga walked straight to Aster. He kept poking at his wound with his fingers, saying, "I heard you were injured." "Does it hurt?" Actually, he had already healed it with magic last night, but fearing others might notice, he still wore the bandage. Aster was speechless. For others, that was still a wound. How could he poke it so hard? At this time, the king asked about the little prince. Yuga quickly pulled his hand and ran to the cradle. He picked up the prince, asking joyfully, "Isn't he cute?" as if showing off his own child. The prince didn't seem to like Yuga, constantly kicking him with his feet, saying incomprehensible words telling him to go away. Aster inwardly exclaimed, "What a good baby." Now they both had to watch the little prince 24 hours a day, and they were truly exhausted. Aster walked over to the wall and sat down. Suddenly, the door was thrown open, banging against the wall. The queen walked in. As soon as the king saw the queen, he started, "I heard from Yuga that there was a commotion yesterday. We entrusted you with the precious heir, yet you can't even watch a child properly." Aster was very afraid inside, but he didn't want to see the poor queen suffer such false accusations. He bravely stepped forward. "It was all the servant's fault. It has nothing to do with the queen. She's not involved in this at all." The king asked Yuga, "Is this Aster?" "He's just as you described." He started speaking sarcastically. "I thought the queen wasn't interested in politics. Didn't expect her to manage the prince's household so well." Then the king and queen began a conversation that others couldn't understand. The king was very angry, his face turning red, forbidden to leave. The queen during the day was stiff and lifeless, as if acting, which pained Astrid greatly. Although he had no right to feel sorry for her, just then, Yuga suddenly called out to Astrid from behind. He handed over a box of tea to improve Hill's insomnia. Aster was shocked. He had no outward connection with Hill, let alone anyone knowing they lived together. Yuga interrupted him, saying, "As I said, I like you, so I'll tell you a secret. In this palace, there's nothing I don't know. Life is too cruel." Although he loved fantasy novels in school and longed for this world, even hoping for a cave leading to this world to appear. She said to Mio, "Are you still alive? As long as I have a pillow and blanket, I can sleep soundly. How about you?" Mio was still hanging on. "We knights can basically adjust our sleep schedules." After saying this, he ran back to the king with a bright smile, leaving Aster completely bewildered. Only he and the little prince were left in the room. The king and queen rarely visited, yet neither thought to hold him, not even pat his head. Astor looked at the little prince with a gentle face. "They came to see you because they were worried. They love you very much." Although Astor wanted to tell him more than once, "Your father is a big villain, but facing such a small child, how could he be at peace with that?" The next day, while Astor was in class, Klein suddenly appeared. Klein, who was on an expedition, suddenly appeared in the queen's palace. The main army hadn't returned yet, but he came back alone. Because he missed Aster too much, Klein was like a god on the battlefield. A war that was supposed to take 3 months was shortened to 1 month. Moreover, all the royals except the king were captured and brought back his prisoners. Therefore, the palace was in a rush preparing for the victory ceremony. Saya also hurriedly began teaching Aster martial arts. Klein suddenly pulled Aster to his side, blushing and smiling. He said, "Let me join your class. Don't worry, I'm very good at dancing." After greeting Saya, he said he had something to discuss with Aster. Now, every night when the little prince cries, both of them wake up startled and run to the prince's room. If this continues every day, they'll surely die from overwork. Saya was very tactful and left. Under the forceful pressure, have you been well? Has anyone bullied you? In Aster's heart, the first person he subconsciously thought of was Yuga. His very existence was the source of pain. Now there was also Seller's attack added to it. Thinking of this, Aster suddenly raised his hand and touched Klein's face. This man, called the God of War, had eyes full of warmth and gentleness. Though they had the same eye color, Seller's eyes only held an endless, icy coldness. He wondered if he could ask him about having any brothers. Klein grabbed Astor's hand as he was about to withdraw it. Smiling, he placed it back on his face. Astor came to his senses, realizing what he had just done. He quickly pulled his hand back, saying, "No one has bullied me." Klein looked at his empty hand, full of disappointment. Then he smiled and invited Astor for a walk. He had brought gifts for Astor from this expedition. He had privately kept 2 items from the spoils of war. When the box opened, it burst with a dazzling golden light. These were earrings worn by generations of Rohai queens. Aster kept talking to herself. "Tonight I'll bring the little prince to sleep in my room. This way, when he wakes up, I can feed him right away. If you're not a light sleeper, why don't you come sleep in my room too?" Such an elaborate style didn't suit Aster at all, but not wanting to discourage him, Aster could only praise their beautiful. "I'll wear them when I get my ears pierced someday." He seemed a bit disappointed, his whole demeanor deflated. Then he pulled out a music box. He had commissioned a famous local craftsman in Roh. The female figurine on top was based on Aster's name from the letter Aster had sent him. But due to the pose, it looked like she was running away. Aster happily thanked Klein. Seeing her good mood, he wanted to take the chance to ask about Seller. Just then, the entire sky turned red. Several huge fireballs flew rapidly from a distance. Falling straight down when danger struck, he used his body to shield Astor. Countless fireballs suddenly appeared in the sky. At this moment in the Queen's palace, Ellie, standing by the window, heard a huge rumbling sound. By the time she realized it was too late, she couldn't react in time. After a flash of light, Ellie disappeared completely with the explosion. Leaving Anna's helpless screams, the palace was in chaos. Everyone was running and screaming. After processing this in his mind, Mio felt that a single man and woman sharing a room wasn't a good idea. Aster was completely stunned, frozen in place, until he heard Klein's voice calling him back to his senses. By now, Klein was bleeding from his head. He firmly held up the collapsing ceiling above Aster with both hands. His arms were constantly bleeding. Even so, he felt it was fine as long as Astor was safe and sound. As a knight, his hands were so heavy. Now both his right hand and left arm were severely injured. Astor trembled in fear, yet Klein still smiled and comforted him. "I'm fine, don't worry." Aster suddenly realized they couldn't stay here any longer. He stood up to make room for Klein. This was the only thing he could do. With creaking sounds constantly ringing out, Klein used all his strength to twist open. The building directly crumbled. Aster felt deeply guilty about his own incompetence. Why was he such a weak and insignificant person, unable to help at all? At this moment, he hated himself even more. He was now in tears. Klein gently wiped away the tears from his eyes. As a 21st century woman, Aster didn't see any issue with it. "Let's just consider it our fate. This way we can both get more sleep." Aster hadn't been sleeping well and felt like she was getting dumber. She needed to keep her mind active. Still smiling, he said, "As long as I'm by your side, you have nothing to fear." Just then, fireballs rained down from the sky again, landing nearby. Without any hesitation, Klein pulled Astor into his arms. This meteor shower was caused by the escaped Rohai queen. Astor was completely stunned. Wasn't it only great magicians like Hill who could use such advanced magic? Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered what Hill had once said. He had cast a defensive spell in the room. If anything happened, they should go there. No one else knew there was a safe place in the Queen's palace, including Aster, who hugged Klein tightly as if making a final farewell. "I need to find the prince. After all, I'm his wet nurse." Aster chose to enter the Queen's palace at the risk of her life. In fact, she was very afraid. She also didn't understand why the king had appointed her as the wet nurse. She didn't like the prince at all, but as a wet nurse, even if the prince was a burden to her, she wanted to fulfill her responsibility. Even in a life-threatening situation, she had to rush into that sea of fire. Astor looked back at Klein's bloodied hands, feeling very anxious. If it weren't for him, she would be dead by now. She looked around and found a sharp piece of stone on the ground. She tore off a piece of cloth from her skirt and bandaged his wound. What did Yoga mean when he said the king loved his son very much? Childcare was too exhausting. There was no time to consider it. In this state, she might step on a landmine any day. Klein's palms were already a bloody mess. He wiped the blood from his face, but it only got dirtier. Aster couldn't bear to watch, so she helped clean him up. Klein was like a puppy trying to please its owner, nuzzling her palm. He gazed at Aster lovingly. Even if you're going to hell, I'm willing to go with you. Klein pulled Aster along as they ran through the ruins, but due to his lack of exercise, he was already out of breath. Despite his severely injured arm, Klein picked Aster up directly. "Excuse me, but I think this will be faster." Aster inadvertently got close to Hill, who was resisting the attacks with electricity. Klein seemed to sense something and told her to duck. Then he used magic to protect them both, passing straight through the scorching flames into the queen's palace. High-level sword mages like Klein could do such things, but just now to protect Aster, he couldn't stay calm at all. The queen's palace was already damaged beyond recognition. Flames were burning everywhere. They even had to climb to go up. Suddenly, another huge meteor fell again. The entire palace was shaking. The path ahead had been smashed into a big hole. Not long after, a small bed was added to Aster's room. Klein held Aster tightly, hoping to give her more sense of security. "Trust me, you just need to look into my eyes." Klein's eyes were grayish-blue, like the sky before snow on the coldest winter day. However, contrary to that, he was always gentle and kind to Aster. He used his magic and jumped with all his might, but due to the distance being too far, they crashed heavily onto the ground. To protect Aster and his arms from falling, Klein used his broken hands to absorb the impact. Immediately, his bones made a cracking sound, not wanting Aster to worry or feel guilty. He gritted his teeth and endured the heart-wrenching pain. After countless hardships, they finally reached the upper level. The corridor in front of the prince's room was mostly intact, while the lower floors were destroyed, leaving only the skeleton. Even the impact of meteors would cause the entire building to shake violently. It was clear this place wouldn't last long. Aster rushed into the prince's room. The huge hole in front of her made her heart tremble. Just then, Anna's cries were heard. She was seen trembling all over, with the little prince crying incessantly in her arms. Nearby, Mia was severely injured, stabbed in the abdomen while trying to protect them. Aster had actually suggested to Sir Mia that they sleep in the same room, because this way, both of them could get more sleep. Aster asked confusingly about Ellie's whereabouts, but was interrupted by another attack. She hurriedly led everyone to her room. Sure enough, it was unscathed. Mio lay on the bed in pain. His condition was very bad. He had a high fever, but at least he wouldn't die before the little prince grew up. Only now did Aster finally remember this matter. For Yug and the king, it was a trivial matter, so it was only briefly mentioned in the novel. This caused Aster to not remember it immediately. But for minor characters, it was a deadly and massive disaster. Aster cut a piece of cloth with a knife to bandage Mio's wound. He then asked about Ellie's whereabouts. Anna immediately choked up. People who were together just moments ago disappeared after a flash of fire and the collapse of the ceiling. Aster smiled comfortably, saying she must have safely escaped and just couldn't make it back up yet. But this explanation was just a wishful thought. No one wanted to expose the truth. At this time, the queen's palace was still under attack, but this room was extremely stable. All attacks were blocked outside the window. The entire room was filled with Hill's magical aura. Klein was very aware of this, but he wanted an explanation for Master. After all, in his eyes, Hill was a lazy and cowardly great mage. He had never put in such effort on the battlefield. If he could use such magic, there wouldn't have been incidents of killing allies. From their first meeting, Mio thought Aster was a strange woman. She looked ordinary but was very bold. Thinking about this, Klein felt a sharp pain in his head, finding it hard to believe. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound was heard. A meteor had fallen into the adjacent room. That was the queen's quarters. Aster suddenly felt dizzy. How could she have forgotten about the queen? Was anyone taking care of her? What if she was all alone? She abruptly stood up with a determined look in her eyes. She said, "I have to go bring the queen here." Everyone was extremely surprised. However, she still insisted and refused clients offered to accompany her. "You've lost too much blood. I'll go alone. It won't be dangerous." Some things are easier said than done. Aster was originally a very clear-headed person. The world is dark and dangerous, and everyone must survive on their own. If she hadn't remembered that night, she would never have gotten involved. Aster ran quickly, hoping the queen had already reached a safe place, even if it meant she would have run in vain. However, when she pushed open the door, the queen was already in a perilous situation, like a princess waiting for a prince to rescue her in a high tower. Looking at her now, she was indeed very strange. The worst-case scenario had indeed happened. The situation here was even more miserable than in the prince's room. No one had come to help the poor queen. She was too scared to move, collapsed on the spot. After the meteor crashed through the ceiling, it went straight through the floor. The bottom was unfathomable, having penetrated even to the underground. There was almost nowhere to step. Aster's eyes were determined, giving herself encouragement. She grabbed the protruding patterns on the wall, slowly inching forward. Suddenly, the only wooden plank under her feet broke. Aster instantly lurched forward, about to fall. She quickly reacted, jumping forward a step. Fortunately, she survived. Aster grasped the queen's hand, smiling and saying, "Let's leave this place together." "There's a safe place." The rescued queen smiled happily. She held Aster's hand tightly. Now they could only return from the other side. Although there was more space to step here, there was a gap ahead that needed to be jumped across using a wooden plank. Now, not only did he not meet a handsome man saying, "I've come to pick you up," but he wasn't even given beauty or intelligence buffs. In the morning, while having breakfast with the little prince, the two were chatting. Aster asked about the library's location, as she wanted to find some books on childcare. It would be better to learn directly from experienced people, but that was clearly impossible. The little prince in her arms seemed to be in a good mood, babbling and playfully tugging at Astra's hair. Suddenly, Astra turned to Sergio and said, "If you're done eating, come talk to the little prince for a while. I can quickly eat my meal too." Astra simulated the scene in her mind, hoping it could bear the weight of two people. However, misfortunes never come singly. At this already dangerous moment, the entire building began to shake. Aster suddenly lost her footing and was about to fall backward. Luckily, the queen was quick and swiftly pulled her back. She had saved a life. Taking advantage of the pause and the shaking, Aster quickly jumped forward. When she looked back, she was suddenly struck with horror. A large chunk of the only wooden plank was missing. However, the queen said nothing. She lightly stepped and jumped with graceful movements. Just as she was about to reach Aster, due to the distance being too far, she was about to fall straight into the deep abyss. In this critical moment, Aster desperately grabbed the edge with one hand. With the other hand, she quickly grabbed the queen. The crown fell into the roaring black hole with no sound of it hitting the ground. The queen, not wanting to burn Aster, looked extremely calm with a resigned expression. "Let go," said the queen, hanging at the edge of the black hole, calmly telling Aster to release her hand. But Aster continued to hold on with all her might, gripping tightly. However, she was constantly being pulled over. Learning it was the emperor's wish, Aster couldn't understand. He supposedly loved his son, yet didn't name him or come to see him. If this continued, neither of them would survive. She kept comforting the queen, who wanted to give up, saying that if they held on a bit longer, they would surely be saved. The intense pain from the pulling made her feel like her arm was about to break off. The hand gripping the edge was continuously dripping blood. The queen's hand was also slowly slipping. Gritting her teeth, asked her persevere desperately. Her thoughts were in turmoil. The queen clearly had the status of royalty, so why had no one come to save her? Klein was also like this before. If I were a strong knight like Klein, would I be able to save the queen? Aster was already in tears. She hated her own incompetence. In the face of death, she was terrified. But letting go would frighten her even more. If she shouted loudly, would her voice reach the room? Or should she let go of the supporting hand and try pulling with both hands? Just then, another attack caused the building to shake violently. The two tightly clasped hands finally couldn't hold on any longer. Aster was so desperate that her eyes lost focus. After holding on for so long, was it all going to end like this? At this critical moment, the queen was suddenly pulled out of the black hole. Klein smiled at Aster, saying, "I told you I should have come along." Suddenly, Aster's hand was grabbed. Mio stared at the bloody palm with concern. He just sent a few people to take care of him. It was very strange. Now Aster desperately needed her own time to study childcare guides and gather information. "Why do you always get hurt?" Aster cried. These were tears of joy. She looked at Mio excitedly, thinking to herself, "You came my knight." The queen, now out of danger, sincerely thanked Klein for such an incident to occur, yet no one came to take care of the queen. Just from this point alone, she should realize how difficult her situation was. Mio helped Aster to her feet, carefully dusting off her dress. Seeing him act as if nothing had happened, Aster can certainly ask about his injuries. It was only then that he remembered his own severe injuries. The pain suddenly intensifying, Aster invited the queen to come to her room, saying it was safe there. However, the queen looked at Aster's injured palm, examining it closely. It must be very painful. Then she quickly pulled out the fragments embedded in the flesh. Aster screamed internally from the pain, but she politely said, "Thank you for your kindness." Aster turned her head, looking at Mia with teary eyes. If pulling out a single splinter hurt so much, how painful must it have been for him to remove such a large object? Aster had a morbidly devilish curiosity and decided to watch closely from the side. After enduring a series of hardships, the four finally returned safely to the room. The queen smiled with joy seeing the young prince safe and sound. She gently poked his little cheeks, but she refused to hug him. She studied late into the night and decided to learn from teacher Saya. The child must have been frightened. Listening to a familiar heartbeat would be better, but in reality she didn't like the young prince much. Due to his hair color, he didn't look like her child. Aster instinctively nodded in agreement. Just then Klein asked curiously, "Why are there two beds in this room?" Aster glanced at Mia, pondering how to explain away the situation. She could only lie, saying, "Sometimes it's too tiring to be with the young prince, so we sleep in the same room. But we can't sleep together with the prince, so there are two beds." Aster desperately tried to change the subject. "More importantly, don't you think the meteor's targets seem to be the queen's palace?" Before the main hall was protected by a barrier, the meteors flying towards it were noticeably fewer than those aimed at the queen's palace. However, as a duchess from a marquis family, it's unlikely she'd have any grudges with a small country like Rohai. Aster wondered to herself, surely they wouldn't attack here because of some benefit from Yuga. Suddenly her back fell hot. Aster curiously opened the door. Raging flames were blocked outside the door. How are they going to leave like this? Aster cried bitterly. In the end, the whole room might roll down like a box. Just then, a swirl of white light appeared. Hill suddenly appeared in the room. His presence here meant that the Queen of Rajai had been captured. His first concern was whether Aster was all right. How to write a proper proposal. That day, Aster and Queen Faye came to the little prince's room. Then he noticed her injured palm, looking pained. He bent down and blew a breath. After a flash of white light, Aster's palm miraculously healed, showing no signs of ever being injured. She marveled at this wonder, her eyes shining. She began to talk endlessly about the current situation. He'll look at her with an indulgent expression. "I'm a great mage. Mages are the ones who establish rules." He gently raised his hand, unleashing enormous magical power. The entire queen's palace was bathed in a cool breeze. All the fires were extinguished. Astor was captivated by this magical spell. After briefly introducing the people in the room, he'll step forward to heal the two severely injured individuals. Indeed, magic seemed like a universal panacea. It was all absorbed into his hands. With a gentle squeeze, it disappeared. After a simple treatment, the two were restored to their original state. Klein repeatedly clenched his fist to check. After confirming there were no issues, he sighed in relief. Although he told Astor it was nothing, he was actually very afraid of not being able to wield a sword again. Even so, he chose to sacrifice that hand to protect Aster. Such an act would move anyone, but Aster kept reminding herself not to be moved. Aster asked Queen Faye what name she wanted to give the little prince. Queen Faye just calmly stated that he was the legitimate heir to the throne, so His Majesty should name him. On the night of the attack, due to severe damage to the queen's palace, all survivors packed their belongings and gathered outside the palace. The bodies of the victims were laid out in an open area. As expected, Ellie was among them. The beautiful wish was ultimately shattered, and broke down crying, collapsing to the side, unable to calm down for a long time. There were also a few other acquaintances and girlfriend who had died. Things came to a hasty conclusion. The living had to continue living. Aster was transferred to Yuga's magnificent palace, the real queen's palace that had been taken. It was Aster's first time entering here. The splendor and opulence left her in awe. There were numerous maids and guards and even dedicated entertainers. Yuga stood at the center of the upper level, smiling as he greeted Aster. "It's truly delightful to have you serve the prince in my palace." The powerful aura he emitted left Aster stunned. He tilted his head and invited her to have a cup of tea. The spacious hall was quickly transformed into a dining area. All kinds of desserts were available. It was clearly a preemptive move. Her own thoughts didn't matter. After a pause, the queen told Aster that she had thought before if it was a boy, she'd name him Yuzian. Queen Faye had wanted to name the child Yuzian since she became pregnant. A maid brought in a crib. Aster placed the sleeping little prince inside. After all that had happened, he was also exhausted and sleeping soundly. Yuga, who approached, looked a bit haggard. He brought up the tragic state of the queen's palace. Asking with concern, "You must have been terribly frightened, right?" Aster spoke honestly. The meteors seemed to only fall on the queen's palace. It's surprising that this place wasn't affected at all. Yuga leisurely sipped his tea and replied with a smile. Meteors fell here too, but the great mage has already helped repair everything. We really should think improperly. Hearing this, Astor was shocked. It could actually be repaired. At the same time, she felt disheartened. Logically and emotionally, they should have repaired the queen's palace first. Yuga suddenly brought up the item he had asked Astor to give to Hill a few days ago. Because she found it suspicious, Astor had hidden it away. It was convenient to say it was lost during this incident, but Yuga still didn't give up. He continued to bring out new tea and medicines. The great mage has done so much for us, I can't repay him enough. This tea and medicine are beneficial for insomnia, just like what you're drinking now. Astor instantly lost control and spat out what she hadn't yet swallowed. Yuga didn't mind at all, laughing heartily as he asked, "How is it?" "Fragrant, isn't it?" After the attack, Astor was transferred to Yuga's palace. The little prince, who was drinking milk, lifted his head upon hearing this name as if he liked it. After handing the child to Astor, Queen Faye mentioned her milk was decreasing, so they'd need to increase the formula amount in the future. That night, after the butler had arranged her living quarters and belongings, he left. Astor was very curious about the nearby garden. She took a walk with the little prince. The courtyard was beautiful in the moonlight. The decorations and design here showed how much the king valued her. In the pond, there were even koi fish larger than the prince. At this moment, the medicine in Astor's pocket fell out. Although the tea seemed fine when she drank it earlier, she wasn't sure about this medicine. Feeling a bit guilty, Astor poured the medicine into the fish pond, mentally apologizing to the koi. She felt it wasn't right to give it to Hill, but not giving it wasn't right either. She could only let the koi try it first, but why did you give her this thing? Could it be that if something went wrong, he'd blame it on her? Looking at him, he didn't seem like someone who'd use such petty tricks. After returning, Astor began writing an observation diary. Today, for the koi, the fish gathered from all directions to eat the food. Although it was spectacular, it was also somewhat disgusting. Then she left the room. This meant she wouldn't see the little prince as frequently in the future. She didn't seem to have much affection for this child, but the little prince, having seen his mother, was very happy. Just then Anna and Mio arrived. Anna, though freshly washed, still had red-rimmed eyes. She burst into tears. Ellie's family was in a remote countryside. Probably no one could come to see her off. Astor and the little prince weren't allowed to attend the funeral either. She felt deeply guilty. Ellie was a good person. She had raised several younger siblings herself and genuinely liked the little prince. If it weren't for her own clumsy self being the wet nurse, Ellie wouldn't have lost her life helping there. Late at night, Astor returned to her room. There was only one bed. She unabashedly invited Mio to sleep together on the bed. Mio was visibly shaken, but Sundra-like refused, curling up on a small sofa nearby. Astor didn't say anything more. She wrapped herself tightly in the blanket. Secretly, her eyes were all so red-rimmed. In fact, the day's experiences left her shaken and distressed. She just kept up a calm appearance, not letting others see her cry. Mio noticed her unusual state and called out to her repeatedly, but Astor didn't know what to say. Astor suddenly sat up, shouting, "I'm going to sleep now." Her whole body was shaking uncontrollably. She still couldn't believe Ellie was gone. Was this intense emotion sadness? Astor handed the child to Ailey and resumed her studies, but writing a proposal seemed more difficult than she imagined. Or was she angry at someone? She buried her face in her knees, not wanting to show her vulnerability. She felt she shouldn't be thinking like this, yet it seems she had to keep thinking to stay alive. Her mind was already on the verge of collapse. She just hoped the day would never dawn. He actually said he was Astor's master. Early in the morning, Astor composed herself. She took the little prince out for a walk. They were about to go feed the koi, but met Selikaji at the door. Astor immediately felt fear, stepping back. Why was he here? However, Selikaji directly accused, "Let me hear the reason for your betrayal." Astor was completely unfamiliar with this name and didn't know how to react. Seeing this, Selikaji became angrier. "You don't even want to defend yourself." Astor hesitantly asked, "Did I betray the count?" Hearing this, Selikaji frowned deeply. He raised his cane and pointed it at Astor. His expression instantly darkened. "Watch your words, Dr. Astor. Isn't your master your sister's maid? What do you call a master?" Astor had no choice but to play along. "I'm sorry, did I betray my master?" After calming down, he had to admit he had come to another world, and he was just an extra without any buffs. As expected, it was full of errors. It turned out that she hadn't reported to him for these few months. So Selikaji considered this betrayal. So you've become the prince's wet nurse. You think you can escape? Aster stared at him calmly. Because there are many eyes and ears around, I thought I should be careful. I didn't want to cause trouble for my master. This flattery seemed to please Selikaji. He snorted coldly in its sunder manner and lowered his cane. Have you found the magic circle? Aster was very surprised to hear about the magic circle. Could he be referring to the one in the basement? Not knowing his intentions, Aster could only lie and say she hadn't found it yet. As expected, Selikaji's expression turned cold again. You're really useless. Don't forget it was I who picked you up, gave you a name, and raised you. So you belong to me from head to toe. You should be grateful I gave you a chance to repay me. I must say, this is really an unlikable guy. I don't know if it's his inferiority complex that makes him antisocial, or if he's just naturally antisocial. Aster screamed inwardly. This person definitely has no friends. He's even more unlikable than the annoying Yuga. Aster wanted to extract some useful information. How would finding the magic circle help the master? Selikaji obviously didn't want to tell her, only saying finding that is equivalent to having all the weapon clues. Aster wanted to cry. At her age, she still had to rush assignments. The next day, Yuga came to visit the little prince again. There's only one in the queen's palace. This is why I sink you into the palace. This time, Aster finally understood. He was the culprit who pushed the original owner into this cruel life. Aster encountered Selikaji in Yuga's palace. Only then did she realize he was the culprit who pushed the original owner into the fire pit. Suddenly, Selikaji mentioned Klein. You must be happy to see someone you've missed for so long. Seeing Aster didn't refute, Selikaji was extremely displeased. It turned out he thought the original owner liked Klein, but Aster believed even if this were true after Eddie had been dead for so long. Klein only found the original owner now. He should have moved on. Now her head was in a mess. What kind of relationship did these people have? Selikaji didn't say much more. He was about to leave directly. Aster anxiously asked from behind, how should I submit the report? Selikaji said this was Yuga's palace with many people around. Do it come personally later. Aster screamed in her heart, please don't come, still not recovered. Aster, with a vacant look, took the little prince to feed the fish. Maybe because it was delicious, they seemed to have gone crazy. If only I could live such a simple life. What should I do if Selikaji suddenly comes? How to explain to Anna and Mio? It's really difficult. Aster began to organize her thoughts. 3 years ago, Eddie passed away. After Aster curtsied, she sarcastically commented that his green clothes suited him very well. She emphasized that not everyone could pull off that color. Klon had been moving around the battlefield ever since. The original owner obeyed orders and entered the queen's palace. Selikaji married the queen's sister, but for some reason they never had children. The queen, who also had no children, became pregnant with the little prince. I thought that magic circle was used to treat infertility, but seeing how he treats the countess, he doesn't seem like someone who would do such a thing. Could this magic circle have other uses? Selikaji's eyes do look very similar to clients, seeing how they dislike each other. Could one of them be an illegitimate child? I heard such things were common in the past. I need to ask Klein about this. If it's Klein, he should tell me everything. If it's him, the only one in this world who had never heard me, that night it started raining outside. Anna was shivering, soaked to the bone. She had been crying all day, her eyes so swollen she could barely open them. According to her, Ellie and the others' bodies were cremated outside the royal city. I don't know if it's true, but they deliberately chose to steal the meteorite from the queen's palace. People outside the palace were mostly unharmed and most hit by debris. Fortunately, most people in the queen's palace had taken shelter in the underground kitchen. The meteorite barely hit there. Astra looked at the constantly sobbing Anna and hugged her tightly. Yoga naturally didn't understand Aster's hidden meaning and was quite pleased. Then he gently touched the crib. Actually, when the king swung the mirror at the wet nurse, Aster felt she wasn't from the same world as them, but being together leads to getting to know each other. Contact leads to feelings. How could one not like such kind and gentle people? After the accident, she seemed to have become a different person. On the 3rd day of feeding medicine to the koi, they seemed not only fatter, but their scales were also shiny and glossy. Aster wondered if this was some kind of tonic. After finishing, she returned to the palace. Lyanna was lying on the ground looking at something. Their sudden appearance startled her, but Anna said she was checking the cleanliness of the place. It was spotless, completely different from the queen's palace. Even the carpets were made of silk, and aside, it seems they have plenty of staff here. Seeing this, Aster joked, do you want to apply to work in Lord Yuja's palace? Anna just smiled without saying anything. Aster found it very strange. At times like this, she should be tugging at her clothes, excitedly questioning, "Are you crazy? Asking me to serve that fox? How could she be so calm now?" Aster held Anna's hand, expressing respect for her choice. He marveled at how fast the child was growing. "I won't be able to come for a while. If he forgets me, I'll be so heartbroken." But she hoped Anna would join her in taking care of the little prince. Besides, being a maid for the prince is very popular in the marriage market. Aster promised to introduce her to many good men. At this, Anna remembered Klein's adjutant. When would they come? The prerequisite is that Klein knows Aster lives here, but it's difficult for maids to go out without reason. They both turned to stare at Mio, eyes gleaming. They now had someone who could go out without babysitting. "Among us, you're relatively free. We'd like to hear news from outside too. It'd be even better if you could call others to come." Although Mio looked very burdened, she looked at a store and smiled indulgently, "Tempting you, since the incident at the Queen's palace." Anna seemed to have become a different person, often sitting with a vacant stare. Mio had also noticed her unusual behavior, but when a store suddenly appeared, interrupting, she would smile and return to normal. Just then Saya suddenly appeared. A store was very shocked. She didn't expect classes to resume so quickly after such an event. Now she couldn't remember anything. The teaching was not going smoothly. The uncoordinated Aster kept stepping on the teacher's feet. Aster outwardly asked with concern about why he couldn't come, but inwardly she cheered, hoping he'd never come back. Both were very tired, especially teacher Saya. Her entire foot was visibly red and swollen. At this rate, there's no way to dance at the victory ceremony. Due to the unfortunate event, the activity was moved up to this week. Because everyone wanted to forget, Aster could hardly imagine herself at the victory ceremony wearing a dull dress, stepping on her partner's feet while dancing. This was really troublesome for others. Does this kind of man make your heart flutter? Teachers say I knelt on one knee, inviting Aster to be his dance partner at the victory ceremony. This made Aster blush and her heart race. He said I do very seriously and excitedly. Je laughed and stood up, leaning close to his ear. It probably won't be the teacher that day. Aster's heart was racing wildly. If not the teacher, who could it be? After Je left, Aster pushed the little prince out to sunbathe. He puzzledly asked Mio beside him, "Didn't I ask you to call Earl Caleb? Why did you call teacher Je instead?" Mio clearly heard the conversation but pretended to be clueless, saying Aster didn't specify who just said to call someone. Aster was speechless. Although he was happy to see the teacher, he wasn't prepared for a lesson. On a whim, he asked Mio if he could dance. Mio, being very straightforward, said he didn't want his feet stepped on. Actually, Aster didn't intend to trouble him. Besides, it was hard to imagine Mio dancing. Yuga smiled and replied, "The war is over." Aster understood they had finally turned the page on the escape chapter of the novel. After the war ended, the little prince's name would be announced. And so, they ended their not-so-pleasant conversation. Astor took the little prince to feed the fish under the scorching sun. When he saw the fish pond, he instantly broke into a cold sweat. The pond was crowded with fish, seemingly many more than before. There was even a giant koi fish. He had only seen it in photos before. It looked like it would take 3 people to carry. Astor found it a bit scary and quickly left. The next day, Klein came to Yuga Palace, still carrying a pure white bouquet. Astor was playing with the little prince. He suddenly handed it over, smiling and saying, "I was worried about you." Anna thoughtfully prepared tea and snacks for them. Before leaving the room, she winked at Mio. But how could the straightforward Mio understand? She abruptly pulled Mio out. She closed the door. Recently, Khan had been busy with triumphized affairs, so he came late. On that day, he would be promoted to duke. This should be the king's method of declaring war on neighboring countries to prevent them from targeting our swordsmen. Now, apart from marrying him to the princess, there's nothing else they can give him. It said there were indeed such common practices. Princesses famous for their beauty were noble princesses from powerful countries, but he rejected them all, so readers always felt Klein's true love was for the king. Although his heart already belonged to someone else, Klein smiled, raising his hand to caress Aster's cheek. Sleep-deprived Aster dozed off again in class. She unexpectedly learned that teacher Saya and the head maid were actually cousins. Then he took out the earrings passed down through generations of Queen Rohai. He had found them again in the ruins. Klein said with a grin, "The Queen of Rohai used to wear these, but I think they suit you better, so I personally asked for them." Aster broke into a cold sweat. The kingdom was already miserable enough, and now their earrings were taken. No wonder they launched a meteor attack. But to attack just upon seeing the earrings, could this be some kind of target? His hard-earned trust and climb crumbled at this moment. After Aster fell into Yuga Palace, the first time he met Klein, there was a question he felt he must clarify today. He stood up and said, "I met Earl Salika." Hearing this name, Klein was visibly startled. He stood up nervously, anxiously asking, "He came to find you." "No, wait, didn't you lose your memory?" Aster took out that pen, "So this is his." The first time Master showed Klein the pen, he only said he had seen it with Eddie but didn't say it was his. He was just trying to lead Aster to that conclusion. Actually thinking carefully, this is a simple question. The initials on the pen Aster has are not Klein's, but those are the original owner's, Master Seiyu. At that time, Klein's eyes were clearly off. Why did he hide this? The original owner was just an accessory when he was with Eddie. Now that things couldn't be hidden anymore, Klein grudgingly admitted, "This pen indeed belongs to Se. I lied to you." At this moment, Astor's trust in him completely collapsed. Astor calmly put down the vase with a thud, his face expressionless. Astor was shocked. One was gentle and caring, the other cold as ice. To have such a relationship, surely one of their genes must have mutated. When teacher Seiya pointed out the mistakes Astor often made, he appeared nonchalant, saying, "Everyone makes mistakes. You didn't lie to me, you just withheld information. It doesn't count as lying." Klein, feeling very guilty, asked, "Will you forgive me?" Aster didn't speak, turning his head away. Whether willing or not, he would eventually forgive him, but he was just a weak and lowly servant. Even deception and lies without malice could be fatal. Before he could take any measures, the situation kept deteriorating. Gradually, he lost his patience. From this moment on, he decided to reassess. Klein was no longer the absolute protector. Where exactly should he be placed? Klein reached out his hand, wanted to grab him, but was mercilessly rejected. "I'm not angry, and it's not that I can't forgive you, it's just not today. Could you please go back first?" Klein silently lowered his head and knelt on one knee. This was the only way he could think of to apologize. But Aster was very cold. Letting him kneel wasn't his idea. Originally, Klein came with a request. Now he didn't have the face to bring it up. "Next time we meet, I'll explain everything to you. Take care until then." After calming down, Astor felt like he was throwing a tantrum for no reason. He sat on the windowsill, holding the little prince. Living earnestly was already difficult enough. He met Klein's disappointed gaze. Clearly, what was needed now was a scene of mutual love. Klein's expression turned surprised. It turned out Astor was smiling and waving goodbye to him. At this moment, Astor felt like he was a big fool. Not long after, the emperor finally remembered to come see his newborn child. Seiya gently patted Astor's head. He comforted her kindly. "To write an essay like this is already quite good. You've worked hard." Suddenly, Astor's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Changing the subject, she asked, "You must be busy lately, right?" Lord Yuga said the war is over. Hearing this, Seiya's handsome and gentle face showed a hint of anger. That fairy, as he'd been coming to the queen's palace often lately, Sir Seiya actually referred to the king's lover as a fairy. Aster had thought all the men in the escape chapter liked Yuga. She didn't expect there to be someone who disliked him. Aster replied, "He often comes to play with the little prince lately." Suddenly her eyes lit up. Now that the war is over, will there be a parade or something? Gorgeous dresses, parades, night views. These were all things Aster dreamed of. Seiya explained that to conceal the fact that this was just a temporary ceasefire, not a victory, this time it would be very grand. Even the king would go out to welcome the troops. Seeing Astor's longing expression, teachers Seiya gently promised, "If you're free during the parade, I'll take you out to see it." But before the parade, the proposal needed to be revised. Aster was overjoyed and instantly became motivated. As she picked up the fountain pen to write, she fell in a thought. Why did the original owner, who was illiterate, carry a fountain pen, and such a high-end one at that? Moreover, the initials on it weren't Aster's. Whose initials were these? One day, Aster went to pay respects to the queen. When the maid saw the man beside the emperor, they were all indignant. How could he bring him here? The queen just gave birth to the prince and has to see them. But she encountered Yuga at the same time, the wife and the concubine in the same room with the child between them. How strange. The queen, teasing, spoke first, praising Yuga's beauty. She said she wanted to touch him herself. Yuga asked flirtatiously, "Do you want to touch me?" The atmosphere between them was suffocating. Queen Fei refused and left the room. Yuga, as if nothing had happened, hugged the little prince tightly. "We haven't seen each other in a while, have we? I'll soon give you a very beautiful gift." Then he glanced at Astor. "I quite like you. I'm in a good mood now. As a gift, I can grant you one wish." Astor clearly knew that when Yuga said he liked her, it was like liking a tail-wagging puppy. How arrogant. Astor mumbled softly, "My wish. I want to turn off the stove that's cooking my instant noodles." Yoga asked what instant noodles were. Astor smiled and said she was just joking. If possible, she hoped the queen's palace budget could be increased. Astor knew in her heart that happy lovers would stay happy forever, and the queen might be unhappy forever. So she thought about what she could change and what she couldn't, hoping to achieve happiness within her capabilities. Suddenly, Yoga said to Astor, "Next time we meet, I hope you'll become prettier." Hearing this, Astor was stunned. This marked a turning point. It meant the storm was about to come. There are countless love stories in this world, but not as many happy endings. Yoga and the king's love should be happy. It's too pitiful. It turned out the man beside the emperor was named Yoga. Astor was still marveling that with his looks, he could definitely become a popular idol if he debuted. However, his true identity was the king's lover, and he was beloved by all. But what about Sir Mio and Sir Alex, who also loved Yoga, and those unnamed admirers, would they find happiness and love? Yoga handed the little prince to a store and was about to leave, but he accidentally tripped while turning around. This action frightened everyone around. Alex and Mio anxiously rushed forward at the same time, extending their hands to support him. Then people from outside the room also ran in, concernedly asking if Yoga was hurt. After witnessed the whole process from behind, she silently cursed, hoping they would all fall down the stairs. Just then Astor saw Mio staring at her. He smiled foolishly as his hand brushed past Yoga's. He liked Yoga. Surely he must know his own feelings by now. That night, Astor was very happy because she had successfully written the proposal, and the head maid had approved her request for leave. She sat on the balcony enjoying the breeze. If only she had a beer to go with it, it would be perfect. Suddenly, Mio appeared behind her. Astor called him over to sit beside her. She then told him he should hold the little prince more often as she and Ellie wouldn't be there during the celebration. Mio calmly stated that he wasn't a nanny and guards didn't need to be that close to their masters. Astor began to imagine extreme scenarios. What if you need to hold him and hide in a dangerous situation? What if he cries when you hold him? Be cautious, live longer, Mio simply replied. The best way is to mind your own business. Suddenly, Astor stared at Mio meaningfully and asked, "What exactly do you like about him?" Mio wasn't sure himself. After the emperor left, Astor looked at the queen's still expressionless face, like a puppet doll, and understood everything. He just felt like there was a fountain in his heart. Whenever he saw or thought of him, that spring would gush forth. Astor asked, confused, "But you can't have a future together. Don't you feel sad?" Mio stared at Astor for a long time without responding. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, messing up Astor's hair. Mio unexpectedly reached out to fix it, revealing a meaningful smile. The two chatted under the beautiful moonlight. How would you react if someone mistook you for being in love with a child? As the little prince grew day by day, his sleeping time became shorter. He also got heavier each day, almost breaking her wrists and shoulders. Astor eyed Mio standing by the wall, hoping he could help hold the little prince more often. But he insisted he wasn't a nanny. Then, sighing helplessly, he said, "I can teach you a method to strengthen your arms." Suddenly, Ellie poked Astor's back from behind. She asked in a low voice, "Are you two dating?"